Welcome to the Propertybuyer Podcast, where we explore the world of residential and commercial real estate to help you make better decisions about buying, selling, or investing in all types of property. Join me, Rich Harvey, CEO of propertybuyer.com.au and multi-award-winning buyer's advocate. Our podcast features expert interviews, market trends and insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of Australian real estate. Whether you're a home buyer, a seasoned property investor, commercial buyer, developer, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge, strategies and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Well, welcome to another edition of the Propertybuyer Podcast. Today we'll be discussing the future of the real estate industry. And we'll be looking at underquoting and whether regulations are adequate. And we'll also do a quick dive into how the property market's going and what technology will impact the way in which real estate is transacted. Now, real estate agents are an interesting breed, but managing them and guiding their behaviour and setting standards requires a special type of skill. Today, we're very fortunate to have the CEO of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales, Mr. Tim McKibbin, to share his leadership knowledge and his wisdom with us today. Great to have you on the podcast, Tim.
Yeah, great to be here, Rich.
And Tim, you've been a real passionate advocate of the real estate industry, and I just want to say a special thanks on behalf of not just buyers agents, but all agents, honestly, because I don't think people thank you enough for the way you've, served the industry. And what I really love what the Institute does is really look after members to deliver the best quality service. So I just want to say a thanks up front, mate.
Yeah, and I mean, I got to say thank you to the industry as well. People ask me about the job I've got here, and I always respond by saying I've had two kinds of days here. I've had days that I'd do it for free and days that I'd pay to do it. So it's been very, very good to me. And I always think about people that are in a job that they drag themselves from Monday to Friday. I've never been like that in here, and it's been wonderful.
Awesome. I just love your passion, Tim, we have a little tradition with our podcast, which is the thought of the week. And today I've got one from Henry Ford. And he says, when everything seems to be going against you, remember that the aeroplane takes off against the wind, not with it. What do you take from that?
Yeah. Look, I'm actually a huge fan of those sayings, because I think they can very, very succinctly make the point. So every time I stumble across one, I actually make a note of it. So I'll make a note of that as well. But
I picked that one for you because you've got a lot of uphill battles, right? You've got a lot of headwinds, yeah?
Yeah, so, well, let's talk about one of the things where you took off into the wind, and you were so determined about it. And buyers agents are now on the front page of the contract for sale of land.
Exactly.
And I think of your achievements that you had when you were on the chapter committee in here, I don't know that was your biggest one, but it would have been in the top three. So buyers agents out there, they can, when they see it next time, they know that was something you drove.
Thank you, mate. No, I remember you organising the meetings with the Law Society and lots and lots of meetings, and we finally got there. I remember just that breakthrough was just very, very sweet victory. But
I remember it actually, because I came into the buyers agents chapter meeting, and I had the document and I slid it across in front of you and I pointed it. And you went stone quiet,
What the hell? We got it. It was like, yeah, fantastic. No, that was a great day. Fantastic day. So take me back to your kind of early days working in the real estate game. What was your first job?
Oh, well, mate, in real estate, I've had a rather bizarre career by any standards. I started life as an electrician, believe it or not. And then I did accounting, and then I did tax. And then I did law.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's a bizarre one. But when I was in law, I was in tax and the property area. So as a country solicitor, you tend to do a sort of bit of everything. So I had that exposure.
Where did you grow up?
Broken Hill.
Oh wow.
Yeah, okay. So I'm saying out in Broken Hill, if you said, look, I'm a property lawyer, then you'd become hungry rather quickly. But when you do a little bit of everything, it's what we do.
Awesome.
But then came to Sydney at about age 39. I worked for a couple of law firms over here, and then there became a position vacant at the REI as the in-house legal counsel. So that sounded really good, and it was. And so I made the application and was successful. So you think about those sliding door moments in your life, because I'd made a couple of applications to other law firms as well. And as always is in life, you've either got nothing on the table or you've got a lot. And I had two other law firms that wanted to interview me, and I did. And so when you had it all sitting on the table and you're saying, oh, gee, what should I do?
But I think that law background has really helped you, particularly in dealing with government, which we'll get into in a moment. And I guess what particularly attracted you to take on the role of the top dog of CEO of the Real Estate Institute? Did you see a need, or did you see, look, I can really make a difference? What was the driver there?
Well, there was opportunity first. I mean, they don't have a course at uni, Bachelor of CEO.
No, they don't, do they?
No. So
it's called the School of Hard Knocks. Mate.
Yeah, that's right. So I had the opportunity to step in. The then CEO was resigning. I think he wanted to pursue other careers, and with the deepest respect to him, I think he was getting on a little bit in years. So he had some other things he wanted to do, and then so the position opened up, and the board said, well, make an application. So it was 20 odd years ago. So so I did, and here we are.
Yeah, well, you've done an amazing job. But I want you to think back about. I want to sort of explore the whole idea of property transactions. Thinking way back and before the advent of the internet and mobile phones. Like, remember way back in the day, how was property transacted before you had mobile phones and the internet?
Yeah, I was having a giggle with somebody the other day about paper, newspapers, and that was the only way that you sold property. And I go back prior to the property being sold in colour. So, but I mean, for the business people out there, I was talking about the Kalamazoo system. I don't know. Some of the older people will remember that and get a giggle. So that was how we used to take rent and all the rest of it. And it all had carbon paper on it, and you had to sign hard in the office. So
it's all changed a lot now.
It has, but it was a good system, but it's now, as you say, that was how things were done. It was all paper, and then came the internet, and then there was opportunities there, as we know, and I think now we are something of an inflection point because of AI. And we've done some things with AI in the business here, which we can talk about a little bit later. But I think we're now going, like the newspapers went to the internet. I think the new technology that's coming is going to shake up the world and is going to shake up our industry.
Let's unpack that, because that's a little teaser for toward the end of the podcast. I really want to get into that. But I want to talk about a big sort of issue, which is the trust factor in the real estate industry, because Roy Morgan typically do their annual survey of the trust scale, right? And on the top of the chart, you've got teachers, doctors, nurses, right? And unfortunately, at the bottom, you've got car salesmen and then real estate agents. I don't think it's moved a lot, to be honest with you.
And there's politicians are underneath
exactly,
just
right.
for completeness.
Exactly correct, mate. I wouldn't miss that one out. So I guess that's really tricky. But do you think the perception of sales agents has changed? And in what way has it changed over time?
Yeah, that is a really great question, and it gave me, or gives me, time to pause on that and ponder it. I know as a kid growing up, again in Broken Hill, you would walk down the main street and there was all of the highly respected business people. So you'd have the manager of the bank, and Broken was a mining town, so we had the manager of the mines and these sorts of things. And then there was solicitors and the doctors, the architects, and the real estate agents. So they were categorised in as one of the trusted and respected people in the community. And sadly, I have to agree with you that has slipped away quite a lot. But there was never any question when I was growing up that they weren't, real estate agents weren't highly regarded for their skills, highly regarded for their professionalism, and people trusted them.
Interesting. So do you think that more could be done by agents to rebuild trust within their local communities? I mean, I see evidence of that, but I'm just curious to see what you see from a helicopter perspective, because you see both country, regional, big city agents. Like, what are they doing to rebuild trust in their community? It's
really a great question, that, because when you talk about real estate agents to the community, most people will say, oh, they're all dodgy, blah, blah, blah. And then they stop and they say, look, except the guy that's in our suburb, he's actually very good, and he's okay. Yeah. And again, you hear that with people's when they discuss certain ethnic backgrounds or religious pursuit, whatever it may be, and they will take the same position. They'll say, "Oh, all of that community, they're all this or they're all that," except for the guy that runs the dry cleaners or the guy that's in the news agents. He's actually very good. He's not like the rest of them. And the reality of it is that they're not the exception. They're the mainstream. They're the people that are in there doing a great job and doing it regularly. But in any industry, in any calling, trade, profession, whatever you want to say, there's bad people. And unfortunately, we have ours. And because of the high profile industry that we are, the light gets shined on that daily.
Yep, you get the current affairs stories, you get the news stories.
Daily.
You get that, absolutely. Because it's also a big number. Like, it's a big transaction. People are entrusting their biggest asset with a person to sell it or buy it.
Yep.
And I think that trust factor really is a super critical thing in choosing an agent. But like you, I agree. A lot of people don't really know agents. They don't. Once they get to know certain people within a profession, they go, it might have a bad experience with a doctor, and they go, all doctors are bad. But they're not. They're there to save lives. Agents are there to serve their customers. So I think it's important that people don't just apply a broad brush. But I want to talk about particularly what you've done and been instrumental in improving professional standards. I know there's been a big push to get, potentially ISO standardisation or in licensing or CPD or accreditation. Talk to us about what you've seen in terms of more professional standards being applied.
Yeah. Again, I probably, when you ask me that question, I haven't had the successes there that I would have liked.
Yeah.
We're referred to now as the property services industry. So where we would have been classified years ago, back when the newspapers were around, as a profession. And that is, that to me is a tragedy. But back again, when the newspapers was there, you had to go to TAFE for 3 years to do it. People can enter this industry now in a matter of days.
The barrier to entry is so low, isn't it?
It's ridiculous.
Exactly.
It's ridiculous. And my current campaign is to start with education. Now, we were able to push education up, the amount of education you have to do. And on the face of it, that sounds great. But the RTOs out there, they just ride straight over the top of that.
They fast track it,
and
get your licence in 3 months, right?
Well, if you do the really long course, but people can get their qualifications very, very fast, and as a consequence of that, you've got people coming into the industry. Look, frankly, they don't know what they're doing. So we fail people who want an industry, want a career in this profession. We fail them because we don't properly prepare them. And we fail the consumer because they're dealing with somebody who doesn't know what they're doing.
Because previously it used to be you had to just you get your certificate and you spend 2 years under a licensee, like an apprenticeship, and then you can get your full licence. And then I remember when back I was a chapter, it was like they completely removed it. It was like zero apprenticeship. It was like, as long as you tick the boxes, you can then have your licence. And then they've now restored it back to 1 year, right?
Yeah, yeah. And people circumvent that as well.
Yeah.
And you said a second ago that Henry Ford said that we take off into the wind. The analogy I like to say to people is that you've when you climb to the top, you've got to use the stairs, not the elevator. It's a
gradual process,
right?
And
it's uphill, and you have to do that. But the reward is that knowledge is power. And we were taught that when I did law, that the more knowledge you have, the more you have to sell. And when people want to differentiate themselves to the market, to their competitors, if you're doing it with knowledge, then that to me out there right now is significant.
Is there any other educational training standards you think you're going to be successful with? Like, do you think there's any changes coming with accreditation in the next 5 years?
I'm petitioning Fair Trading to have an exam for entry. Now, that ain't going to be popular with all of the RTOs out there. So I'm saying to Fair Trading, let them do their study with anyone they want. With anyone they want, but they have to pass an exam before people can enter the industry. And that will shake it up, because trying to get the regulatory authority, ASQA, to get involved in our industry has proven hopeless. For whatever reason, they don't do it. But I think the exam is the way to go. They do it down in Tasmania and do it well. But just some other data on this, 80% of people who enter this industry leave it in the first 12 months because they don't know what they're doing, they become overwhelmed, and they leave.
That's interesting.
I
didn't realise it's such a high figure.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
And what are the numbers? How many people are actually entering the industry on an average basis?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have it at my fingertips, but quite a lot of people, because you wake up Monday morning and say to yourself, what am I going to do with my life? And you say, well, I think I'll become a real estate agent. Come Friday, you are. But you're underskilled, and it's crazy. If you were to sit and listen to the questions we get on a helpline, you'd cringe.
Wow, that'll be quite an education. You should put some of the fair trading policy officers on that helpline, maybe as a training ground.
Yeah, but education to me is the foundations of professionalism and where we will start to rebuild the trust.
But you're right about that, but it goes further than that, I believe. Knowledge is one thing. You get knowledge as a lawyer, you get knowledge as a real estate agent, but then how do you apply that? It's all of that, putting that learning into practice. And I think there's all the difficult situations of how to manage vendors' expectations, how to make sure you're filling in agency agreements correctly, and all of that buyer interaction. It just needs to be taught. It can be caught as well, but teaching them from a theory book, it's only going to go so far.
That's right. And you need both as we used to say 1,000 years ago, you need the chalk and talk. So you've got the teacher, and then you also have the experience, which is why you used to do that apprenticeship you mentioned.
Exactly.
So one holds hands with the other.
Yeah, I want to ask you about agent behaviour. This is sort of a big topic, particularly the word underquoting, which is often talked about in the media as being a major problem. Are you still seeing evidence of that amongst colleagues in the industry? Is it still occurring?
Yeah. Look, I'd like to say to you that it's not out there, but it is. I see it. And I see the prosecutions, and I know that Fair Trading they've had it up to their back teeth, and they are now going to use a different legislation, different regulatory document, which is the Australian Consumer Law. The Property and Stock Act, which is our primary regulatory document, regulatory instrument, has a fine in it of $22,000, and no one wants to pay $22,000. But the fines under the Australian Consumer Law run to millions.
I was just about to ask you about the quantum of fines, and it doesn't seem to be a very big deterrent,
Well, some people that are on the big bucks just see it as a speed bump or the cost of doing business. But the other thing that I would say is, whilst it's out there, and the entire industry detests it because we all get tarred with the same brush when we have that percentage to do it, and because the consumers' antenna are up looking for it all the time. When the market turns and the market goes savagely north, and agents are pricing property, the allegations of underquoting
go through the roof.
Well,
because that's the COVID period, right? I mean, 2021, it would have gone nuts. I mean, I remember COVID was a crazy year for us. I mean, everyone was panicking, thinking everyone's business was going to implode. We didn't have revenue for 2 months, 3 months. JobKeeper kicked in, and then suddenly everyone realised, hey, I need a better home. I need a home office. We need space for the kids, and everyone wanted to buy houses, and the market took off. And we saw lots of properties go for crazy prices because of such low supply. So that was a year that, but maybe just go back one step if I could, Tim. Underquoting, just for the uninitiated, why do agents do it? What's the outcome they're trying to achieve?
There's and sadly an old saying, isn't it? That quote it low, watch it grow; quote it high, watch it die.
Yeah.
So you want people, in the auction room. You want lots of people in there, and that's why I think people do it. One of the most offensive things that I think, and it's not huge, I suppose in the scheme of things, but I had an agent say to me that they were signing up a vendor, and the vendor said to the agent, right, I want you to underquote so we get the best price.
Yeah.
So you've got
vendors giving that instruction.
They know
the
and that really sort of cuts
it
to
meets
the bone.
It meets the compliance legally, right? If it's written on the agency agreement, hey, we're going to put it on at 2 million, but really we want 2.8.
Yeah.
But to what degree is property being underquoted? Like, is it 10% under, 20% under, 30%?
I don't know. I don't know. There's a rule to it. I don't know to the extent, but I hear reports of it. Like I said, sometimes the allegations are because of the market, and we do see those spikes in there. But I've always said, and I'll say again, that it is out there and it's sad. But we need to differentiate between a good auction and underquoting.
Exactly. If you've got 10 bidders all going hammer and tong, it's going to go over reserve.
That's right, and it does.
Yeah.
There's the old saying, isn't it, that what is it? There's nothing like a good auction to stuff up a valuation.
Love it. Yeah, excellent. There was something else I was going to ask you about underquoting, but it's gone out of my head. But it'll come back to me. I guess underquoting, we've seen it. But I guess what's the message out there for both consumers and agents? Around underquoting. To what degree can people sort of guard themselves against it, and what could agents do to better educate the consumer there as to what to pay for a property?
Yeah. The message to agents is, if you want to be respected, if you want to have people to have trust in you, then provide a professional service which is inclusive of not participating in illegal activity. The trust for the consumer, trust is something that you can lose very quickly, and it takes a long time to build. So if we are to go down that road, it will take us some time.
I've got a broad question for you, just around the amount of regulation in the real estate industry versus other industry. Do you think we're an over-regulated industry or under-regulated industry, or fairly regulated? What's your view on that?
So there's two aspects to that, isn't there? There's the amount of legislation, amount of regulatory instruments that are there, and then there's the policing of it. And my understanding is that fair trading would be grateful for some additional resources. Probably don't really want to make that too public, but I think they could use some additional resources in our space, and I think that they should, when you think about the importance of this industry. And I think the good agents out there would welcome it. It's I walk down the street and I see the police out there, and I think that's great, because they're there to
it's
protect.
Visible. Yeah.
Well, they're there to protect me from the bad guys. So if you're doing a good job out there, I think that having fair trading with a greater presence in the market, you would celebrate it.
Yeah, great. So talking about the amount of regulation, if you were suddenly appointed Minister for Housing or Minister for Real Estate tomorrow, Tim?
We really appreciate you tuning in to the Propertybuyer Podcast, and I hope that you're finding our expert interviews helpful. So that we can keep providing this information and growing our audience, we rely on word-of-mouth recommendations. If you found this information useful, could I please ask you to share this podcast with your friends, family and colleagues, and ask them to subscribe to the Propertybuyer Podcast. It would be a big help, and we'd be very grateful for your support. Thanks once again for sharing the links. And now, let's get back to the podcast.
What would be
be the most immediate reform you would tick off and sign off? You had a priority list. This is your Christmas wish list here. I'm giving it to you. What would you put on that list?
Yeah, so the amount of regulation actually in the documentation, now I'm talking about the Act, it is in many respects so prescriptive that it is almost impossible, I think, to comply with. There's one piece of in the legislation, and again, it's attaching to underquoting, and it says that agents aren't allowed to use the words offers over or offers above. Now, that is the most prescriptive legislation that I've ever seen. You know, and it really, when you get down to that granular level, there's something wrong there, horribly wrong.
That only came in like 3 years ago, right?
Yeah, something like that.
And they can still use it in Queensland, right?
Yeah, and you can still use it with rural property or commercial property.
Right.
So it's just
so
residential
confusing.
property.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, what evil are we addressing there? And I remember being with Fair Trading, trying to brainstorm some words that we could use that delivered the same message, but we didn't use those words. And that again is silly. Yeah. We should be talking about outcomes, not process, because you're spending so much of your time following process without the flexibility to deliver the tailored service to the consumer that they want and need.
I remember my question from before. It's just come back to me. It's actually to do with underquoting again. But for example, you know this law so well. But when an offer is presented to an agent that potentially has underquoted a property from a genuine buyer, and they present that offer, written offer, and it's well above the quoted price. This is prior to auction, and their auction guiding is, let's say it's a $2 million auction guide, right? And they've got an offer of 2.1 or 2.2. Does the agent have to change that price guide after receiving that offer?
The agent has to consider it. Yeah, absolutely. So if they've been provided with an offer that is acceptable, when I say acceptable, what I mean is that all other matters are ticked off. So if I was to offer a price for a property, if I was to say to you, I will offer you $200,000, to stay with your example, above what your quoted price is, on the face of it, you say, well, that's where the market is now, it's 200,000. However, if I was to say to you, I'll offer you 200,000 above that price, but I'm going to give you 2.5% as a deposit, and it's going to be subject to this, subject to that, and I'll settle in 2 years, then that won't influence, because that's not acceptable to the vendor. So if it's a straight up stock standard 10% deposit, 42 days, $200,000 above you, then you that's where the market's at. If you say no to that, well, you can't go looking for prices lower than that.
No, good to get that clarity. I want to just turn the conversation a bit to buyers agents, if I may, Tim. And obviously, myself has been a force in that industry. But what's been your perspective on the role of the buyer's agent, and how do you think it's going to? How do you think it's sort of playing out in the real estate transaction?
Yeah, look, I went to the US one time, and I remember talking to agents over there, and I was saying to them, yes, the vendor is represented, but the buyer, purchaser, is not. And they looked at me, incredulously, and were saying, well, how the hell does that work? So you've got one party not properly represented. And I said, well, that's true. And I think that the buyer's agent has probably grown in numbers greater than any other area of practice that I've seen. I haven't put the numbers out there, but I know that they've grown in practice. And if I was a selling agent, I would be happier to be working with a buyer's agent, because they don't bring the emotion to it. I'm one professional dealing with the other professional.
That's it.
To me, it takes me back to days when I'd go to court and you'd look across the table and you'd see somebody.
Up against, yeah.
Well, the person you're up against is a self-represented, individual, and you're looking. So this is just not going to be a good day.
Yeah.
There's emotion there.
That's
There's
it.
all. So I'd rather be dealing with somebody that is the professional.
Knows the facts, knows the market, not going to muck around. Yeah.
And you'll hear people say, "Oh, I'm not going to have a buyer's agent because it's going to cost me so many thousands of dollars." And I say, and the same thing here applies to selling agents, where they say, "I'm going to do it myself, a DIY, because it'd be better." And you say, "Okay, that's fine. How much would it cost you to have a buyer's agent or a selling agent?" You've done the calcs. And they say, "Well, it's going to cost $20,000, say." And you say, "Okay, that's a lot of money." However, does the professional, be it buyer's agent or selling agent, the professional only has to achieve a price that is greater than 20 grand in the case of a selling agent, greater than 20 grand, or saves you 20 grand with a buyer's agent, or is able to get the deal put together that is 20 grand better, and you're better off. So you are better as a consumer to be saying to yourself about the value that the professional brings to it, rather than the cost.
Love it. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, it's really true. But our biggest competition is DIY. People think they're going to do it on their own, and they don't know they've overpaid, or they don't know they've bought the wrong property that they haven't future-proofed, or they don't know they've bought in an area that's inferior for capital growth. Like, all of that value add is what we do as buyers agents. We educate the client, we tell them give them the market research, we advise them on what sort of price to pay, and spend a lot of time analysing and evaluating the right kind of properties for them. But I guess the last question on that, Tim, is how do you think the buyers agent sector is going to evolve? Like, do you think it's going to continue to growing at the same rate? How do you think it's going to evolve in the future?
Yeah, look, I can see it only growing, and that's in support of what I said a second ago, that I think this area of practice, from what I've seen, has gone from the top end of the market when I first saw it. So you'd get the executive coming out from the US to Australia, and they said, these are the things I need. They don't really see it as a home. They see it as a place they'll live for 5 years.
Yeah.
I need something for the kids. I need this, I need that. And I've seen it start there, and it has grown, and I think it'll continue to grow. And I think also that the technology will be of great assistance to buyers agents, and you'll be making data-based decisions. And they say data is the new oil, so we'll be making, and that's where you're bringing that value, that ability to be able to take raw data and turn it into a product that specifically relates to your client. And as I said earlier about regulation, there should be that freedom to look at individuals. And that's what I would like to see.
That's awesome. Well, that's the great segue, because that's exactly what we do as buyers agents. We have a lot of AI that we use in our data analysis, and we have a special couple of programs that we use with 35 data points to actually pinpoint the right suburbs. We're actually using a AI shortlisting tool at the moment, which we're trialling and getting some great feedback on. So it's really speeding up the way in which we do the whole transaction and giving access to far more properties than the individual buyer would find on their own. But tell me about technological changes that you've observed now that we've got AI across a whole lot of different industries, but particularly in the real estate. Do you think the traditional role of the real estate agent will be challenged?
I don't know the answer to that. I just don't. But what I do know is that an agent spends 11% of their time with their client and 89% of their time doing things for their client. And I think we've got to flip that. I think we've got to spend more time with our client, because the one thing that computers can't do is be able to develop trust and interpret data and turn it into the product that the consumer wants. The other thing with technology is to is to be able to use it to increase the amount of services that we bring to it. If we say, well, we're going to buy or we're going to sell that property for the consumer, and that's where it ends, I think that's dangerous. If we look at it as an opportunity with the relationship that you've built, and then we say to ourselves, what else can I do for that consumer? What things can I improve the relationship with and commercially gain from, where everybody's a winner? And I think the best form of defence here basically is attack. So we look at the other things in the transaction and we say, can I either deliver that or can I facilitate it?
Yeah.
And that's where we're headed with that.
That's awesome. Yeah. Do you think, like a lot of people think, oh, it's all going to be done online, you really won't need people to help you transact property, but I disagree with that.
Yeah.
But do you think it's going to look vastly different, the way in which people buy and sell property? Do you think there'll be kind of a whole matching system and you put your data in and then 2 minutes later, here's a property? You know, I can't see that happening myself, but I do think it will be improved and more efficient. But what's your thoughts on how it's going to happen?
Again, from the US, they had a system over there called the iBuyer, which was an interesting model, and everybody said, "Oh, well, that's the end of real estate agents." So the iBuyer worked like this: that if you wanted to sell your property, you wrote the address into the system. Yeah. Might have asked you a few other questions, and then it told you instantly, because they had algorithms, what your property was worth, what the this entity, the iBuyer, was prepared to pay. So there was this conglomerate, if you will, loaded up with cash, and they would come and buy your house, and they do it within 7 days. That's the US stuff.
Yes, yeah.
They do it within 7 days, and then they would acquire your property. Then they would look to make investments in it to improve it, and bundle up other services like finance and insurance,
and resell it,
and then resell it, make money. Sounded good, looked good on the whiteboard too. As a lot of,
I can see where this is going to go.
But this business nearly went broke, or did go broke,
right.
And so it no longer exists.
Yes.
That model. Yeah. So there is still a need for the human to be in there.
Totally.
And there is. And it's because people are individuals, and until people stop being individuals, I think there's...
it's never going to happen.
Never's impossible is a word I don't use, okay. And never is another word I don't use. But we've used a lot of sayings today, haven't we? So I like the one that says, technology won't replace agents, but agents that don't use technology will be replaced.
Yes, great. I really like that. I guess it brings back to the point about auto vals, right? You can press a button like realestate.com and or CoreLogic, Domain. They've all got different kind of online appraisal portals, and some of them are accurate, but mostly I've got to say they're quite inaccurate, and they don't take into account a whole bunch of factors like renovation work that's been done, the slope, the aspect, the noise from traffic. There's a whole range of things. So I think the message out there for anyone listening to this podcast is just be really careful about how much faith, how much trust you put in a particular AI application like an autoval. It's very important to do a lot of individual research around that. So, Tim, I want to just move on to the housing crisis. We're covering all topics today about the housing market, but we've got vacancy rates at record lows. We've got a significant lack of stock. We've got lack of development approvals at an all-time low. I think apartment approvals are down 37%, their long-term average. It's just unbelievable. If you were the housing minister federally, what policy might you implement to alleviate some of this crisis?
Yeah, the problem with having a politician do it is there's politics in it. It's multifaceted, the problem, and people have ignored it because they've seen it as political suicide to actually do what's necessary. We have local councils that take firstly forever to do the DA, to process the DA. We did a reno here in this building, and I underline the word reno. The only thing we did outside was to paint the walls and there was nothing structural here. It's just it's just a renovation, and it took 18 months to get the approval, and 4 months, just 4 months, to do the job. There's something fundamentally wrong with that.
It's crazy.
So there is the first opportunity.
Yeah.
The second thing that the consumers aren't aware is with new property, and obviously this flows through, with new property, that there's 40% of the cost that the consumer pays is taxes and charges levied across all 3 levels of government. So when government says we're keen about affordability and the rest of it, and yet inflate the price by 40%, to me that's something of an disingenuous position to be taking.
Yeah.
So there's those 2 issues. And while we're on the subject of the development approval, there's the amount of DAs that end up in the Land and Environment Court because they have to fight the county. All of those things add costs.
Absolutely.
So there's that. And then there's building materials right now that are, the cost of them is through the roof.
Yeah. And I think, you were a good advocate of the missing middle policy, which the New South Wales government was trying to promote too. Tell us about what that was about and where that's up to. Do you think that will come into the play? The missing middle. So manor housing, CDC, compliant development for townhouses smaller in R2 zones. Basically.
Yeah. So look, I think at a development level, what we should be saying to councils is, initially at least, is to say to the council, what development do you want? Tell me what the envelope, if you will, is. What do you want there? What's the envelope? And if somebody comes along and says that's fine, this is what it looks like, then the approval should be something like instantaneous. This is what you want. This is what I'm giving you, but that's not how it works. It's months or years to get it through the system, and I'm whinging about it here, but it's crazy.
Can I tell you? Well, I got first-hand experience of it. I'm in the process of taking the council to court for land and environment because they're taking about 2 years to do a development approval I'm involved with. When we rebuilt our own house 10 years ago, we wanted to move our house just a little bit further forward, so it was in line with the house in front. Instead of getting CDC, we had to go through council, but it wasn't too bad. It took 4 or 5 months to get approval, so it wasn't too bad. But my longest ever DA, just to do a simple dual occupancy like 25 years ago, my first ever house I built in Pennant Hills, it took 526 days through council. Our DA was the longest ever DA for a dual lock ever in Hornsby Council. It was ridiculous. Right?
What inquiries have been made? Like for 500 and that's that does my head in.
Oh, absolutely. So anyway, we had expert after we got it through in the end, but it was great. But it's like talk about taking off against the wind. It's just there's so many headwinds against increasing housing that it's very difficult. So Tim, we're almost at the end of our discussion, but I guess back to the REINSW, your role and how agents are going to play out. You talked about using AI. Is there any particular technology or AI that you're using yourself in the Institute to keep up with the times? Yeah,
I'm going to hark back to my trip to the US. I came back having, been inspired in all kinds of. So we were the first company in Australia to put an AI bot onto the board as an advisor. So we have, and her name is Alice Ng.
So she sits there as a speaker on the table while you have your meeting?
Yeah, no, she sits on the big television screen in the meeting, and we have fed everything into Alice about property, legislation, you name it, she's got it, and we ask her questions when it's necessary, and she's able to analyse enormous amounts of data, and in the process of doing that, provide us as a board with information that assists in making decisions. But let me underline, assists us in making decisions.
Yes.
But people say, well, it was a gimmick. Why did you do it? And I said, well, why wouldn't you do it? Alice is the smartest person in the world.
Memory like an elephant, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and forgets nothing,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
and learns too. So every time she has an interaction with us, she learns a little bit.
So it's interesting. I think AI can synthesize data very quickly and recall data instantaneously, which can save. I mean, those board meetings could be a lot more efficient, right? I presume.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, a lot more efficient and making. I suggest making data-based, evidence-based decisions. But one of the other bots that we have, but technology, which I think this is fantastic, is we fed all of the NCAT tribunal decisions into this and all of the relevant legislation with respect to residential tenancies. So when the property manager says, I have to run a case, I'm going down there to run my case, our bot will act as the tribunal member. And you can run your case with that tribunal member, my bot, and they'll give you feedback on whether or not.
Perfect.
So you can run your case before you go down there.
I love it. That's so good.
And the learnings obviously come out of that are very useful.
Awesome. Tim, I asked this question of all my guests. What's the best property tip that you'd like to share with our audience today?
Again, data. You know, make a data-based decision. But to make a data-based decision requires an interface between quality data and the consumer, and that to me is where the agent fits. It's being able to take data sets and personalise them down to the needs of your particular client, and that to me is where the real value comes in the professional agent.
Yeah, no, I love that. And lastly, is there any message you'd like to give to both selling agents and buyers, the end consumers, as part of this discussion today?
Knowledge is power. I know I've said it already, but the more knowledge you bring and skills you bring to the transaction, the more relevant you are to the transaction, and relevance is where it's at.
Fantastic. So I've been chatting with Tim McKibbin, the CEO of the Real Estate Institute. Tim, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your knowledge and your vast experience with us today. It's been greatly appreciated.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, Rich.
Thanks again. And look, thanks again for joining us on the Property Buyer Podcast. We look forward to seeing you again on the next edition. Bye for now.
Thanks for being with us on another Property Buyer Podcast. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please click on the SpeakPipe link and we'll answer this during the next episode. If you're looking to buy a residential or commercial property in the near future and would like to get the added advantage of having a buyer's advocate on your side, then please reach out to my team today and send us your inquiry and we'd be delighted to help. Please visit our website at propertybuyer.com.au where you can stay updated with all my latest market updates, weekly blogs and live suburb profiles to help you make better property decisions. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next Property Buyer Podcast.